Hi everyone, welcome to our webinar today. Today's webinar is being presented by the Clean Energy States Alliance, also known as CESA. Our topic for today is exploring the outcomes of new grid projects on the power system, PNNL's GridPIQ tool. We have with us a guest speaker from PNNL, and we also have on the line with us our host for today's webinar, Nate Hausman. Nate is a project director here at CESA. Before I pass it over to our speakers, I'd like to go over a few quick housekeeping notes. All of our attendees for today's webinar are in listen-only mode. That means that hopefully you can hear us, but we can't hear you. You have a couple of options to join the audio portion of the webinar. You can call in using a telephone, or you can connect using your computer, mic, and speakers. If you'd like to minimize the webinar console, you can click on the little orange arrow that you see circled here. You can also use that arrow to expand the webinar console. A very important note, we ask that you please submit your questions as you think of them throughout the webinar by typing them into the question box on your webinar console and hitting send. We will save about 15 minutes at the end of the webinar for a Q&A with the audience. We do have a lot of people registered today, so that means we should get a lot of questions. In order to make sure that we get to your question, type it in when you think of it. Don't wait until the very end to submit your questions. A final note, this webinar is being recorded. We will send you an email within about 24 hours with a link to the webinar recording and a link to the PDF of the webinar slides. And we'll also be posting this recording on our website at cesa.org/webinars. So with that, I will pass it over to our host for today's webinar, Nate Hausman. As I said, Nate is a project director here at the Clean Energy States Alliance.
Thanks, Sam. Yeah, sure enough, I am indeed a project director at the Clean Energy States Alliance, or CESA, as we often call it. In case you're not familiar with us, CESA is a national nonprofit network of public agencies and organizations working together to advance clean energy. CESA is made up of mostly state agencies, and you can see our members from across the country on this slide. So this webinar is being conducted as part of CESA's multi-state initiative to develop solar in locations that provide benefits to the grid. CESA is working with 5 states and the District of Columbia on this project, and the aim is to identify high-value locations for solar and other distributed energy resources. Specifically, we're working in Connecticut with the Connecticut Green Bank, in DC with the Office of the People's Council, in New Hampshire with the New Hampshire Public Utilities Commission Sustainable Energy Division, in Rhode Island with the Office of Energy Resources, in Washington with their state energy office in the Department of Commerce, and in Wisconsin, the Office of Energy Innovation. The project is part of the Solar Energy Innovation Network, a collaborative research effort to explore new ways solar energy can improve the affordability, reliability, and resilience of the nation's electric grid. NREL is operating the Solar Energy Innovation Network with funding from the U.S. Department of Energy Solar Energy Technologies Office. And you can see the URL for more information at the bottom of this slide. So today's webinar is about a tool called GridPIQ that can give us insight into locational value and impacts of targeted distributed energy resource deployment on the grid. With us is Karen Studarus of the Pacific Northwest National Lab, who helped develop the tool and will demonstrate its use to us. Karen Studarus is a senior power systems engineer and resiliency team lead in the electricity infrastructure group at the Pacific Northwest National Lab. Her research includes power system economics, distributed and renewable energy resources, and power system resilience. She currently manages the GridPIQ project to estimate the system-wide impacts of smart grid infrastructure projects. She is a member of the IEEE Power and Energy Society and has been a DOE Hydropower Research Foundation Fellow. She received a BS in engineering from Harvey Mudd College in Claremont, California. Her MS is in electrical engineering from the University of Washington in Seattle. So with that, I'll pass it over to you, Karen. The floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Nate. I really appreciate that introduction and the chance to speak with the group today. Can you see my slides okay? We just switched control over to my computer.
Yes, we can.
Great. It's my honor to talk with you today about a project we're working on here at the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory that's called the Grid Project Impact Quantification Web Calculator, or GridPIQ for short. And my plan today is to give you a little bit of background and introduction about why we're doing this, then flip over to the tool. This is something that you can follow along at home right now by just going to this URL, gridpiq.pnnl.gov. It's a tool that you can use now, and it's also actively under development. So I'll talk about what it can do for you and what is in the works in the coming year. The final thing I'll do is I'll appeal for your input. We're at the stage of the project where we're really eager to find partners who are using this, who would like to be using it, that we can work with you and find some meaningful analysis examples. Where does this provide insight, and where do we have more work to do? So the motivation for this tool is we're looking for a scratch pad, a screening tool. If only I could quickly and easily ask a lot of what-if questions about the power system, screen different project ideas, whether it's new solar developments, new storage, new combinations thereof, without needing to build out an elaborate, many months, many year kind of proprietary modeling software system. Can I get some good insight quick and then dig deeper afterward? We're also looking at making this a transparent tool to compare assumptions, to make it easy for, say, the Public Utility Commission, for utility, for a consumer, to all get on the same page about what modeling assumptions are we really making about the system, and therefore be on the same page about discussing the future impacts. We're looking for a way to sanity check results. Can you quickly plug in and say, does this make sense? Even if you don't have all the same detailed data that the folks you're talking with might have. Also, often in a project development mindset, we're looking at a very specific technology or a specific site, and it's easy to see, with smart grid kinds of projects, you might know the reliability benefits you're seeing in your system. You might know the cost savings you're seeing. But in the highly interconnected grid, there are a lot of interconnected pieces that defy easy insight. And so we want to be able to look at knock-on benefits that you might not have been looking for in your particular analysis that you can then trumpet and herald, or unintended consequences that might inform your design or your policy plans. So we're looking for ways to document benefits quickly and to leverage a lot of data sources, especially open source data out there in the world, in one place. All right. I would encourage you to do jump in with questions as you have them. And if there's a clarifying question, Samantha and Nate will jump in, and I have no concern about being interrupted. So to achieve that, the Department of Energy, Eric Leitner in the Office of Electricity, and his team called upon us to first of all quantify what are some of those benefits to the grid that you can see, initially looking at emission savings, and then quickly picking up other grid level consequences like inter-hour ramping, like peak power, like total energy savings, like fuel cost savings. What can we do to get insight about those quickly? We have an industry steering committee that is from the jump informing and dictating what our specifications are, how we're developing this, and giving us feedback along the way. So our goal is to make something not proprietary, not a black box solution, something totally transparent with all the methodologies and data sources that the whole community can crack open and use to get insight on. And so our marching orders were make it publicly available, transparent, built on sound principles, and with an intuitive user interface. So to underscore again, how does it work? We're looking for a few simple inputs from the user, things that you would know or be able to look up quickly. What's the technology type you're looking at? Where are you going to put it? How big is it? What's its efficiency? and be able to get some good defaults about what's going on in the rest of the system, but things that are completely customizable. If you know more about your system, then you can fine tune it here. And our philosophy is to caution a user when you're hitting the boundaries of the modeling assumptions. Where do things start to break down, or where don't the inputs make sense, without getting in your way. And today I'll go through and show a couple of examples, looking at I think primarily energy storage and solar PV. Though if you want to steer me in the comments, we can adapt from there. So one case that I'll underscore, given that there are a lot of folks with a bunch of different backgrounds on the phone, you can come to this tool with just to explore. But one case that comes up a lot is folks have their own hourly time series data. So hourly data of net load, of solar profiles, of total load consumption on their feeder or in their project. And you've got a before and after version of what the power system time series is, and we can feed it through GridPIQ and get a lot of other outputs, report additional insight about what's coming through there. Before I switch over to the browser, I'm going to just show a couple of the available technologies in here. We're showcasing some existing analysis methodologies on the impacts of conservation voltage reduction on energy storage, on photovoltaics, on coordinated electric vehicle charging, on demand response as modeled as a virtual battery. Look at using residential loads like water heaters for demand response as resources that you can ramp up and down, and draw on a lot of detailed data about what's available in the country for that, right down to the county level. All right, and then I'll come back after the demo and tell you about where we're going next. Let's see. I'm going to switch over what I'm sharing with you to be the web browser. All right, so switching over to gridpiq.pnnl.com. If you're doing that yourself, you'll see a screen very much like this. On the left side, you can see different kinds of technologies to explore. At the top, you can have a chance to log in if you want to be able to save your projects, but you certainly don't need to do that. And Nate, is this coming through okay?
Yep.
Okay, wonderful.
Sure is.
So I'll walk you through a couple of examples. If you're bringing your own data, you have the before and after. So say you have a new widget that you're putting into the grid that maybe is some combination of these projects or something entirely new. You can go into custom and upload your own results files. If you want to explore different energy storage applications, I'm clicking on the energy storage button in the left. The decision tree we're walking through here are the things that are input about what you might need. So the first question you're prompted with when you talk about a new energy storage system is, what are you going to use it for? What's the objective? And we give three common ones here. One is annual energy peak shaving. This might be avoiding a demand charge or deferring an infrastructure investment, or a daily cycling to reduce variability. This is valley filling and peak shaving, or following a stack of market price signals, so energy prices and ancillary service prices. So I'll start by going into the annual peak shaving, which is a common entry point for energy storage systems. And keeping with the mission here of let's give you information about what your system is doing in context, the first question is, where in the country are we installing this? And this is a matter of weather, it's a matter of usage, but most of all, it's a matter of fuel mixture and underlying patterns. So the takeaway that we've been seeing again and again is putting the same system in a different place can have wildly different impacts on the system. I do want to underscore as we go that we've built in a ton of documentation for this. You can link off of the web page to the documentation page, or embedded in each step is information about where is this data coming from? Why are we asking you this? The choice of analysis region, for example, informs the selection of what kind of emission data, line data loss, and fuel costs are involved. And then we tell you where the data comes from. We're drawing on the EPA's Clean Air Market data hourly data set, which has reported input, output, and associated data for every fossil fuel power plant in the country. And then if that's not enough detail, you can dig in more deeply to documentation about each step here within the site. So the user guide is kind of baked in increasing levels of detail. Okay, so we've chosen an analysis region for our energy storage. Now we can either, if you happen to know exactly what your system load looks like before you employ the energy storage, you can upload it here, specify your units and what the start date is, and we'll take it from there. But if you don't know and you're looking for a representative load profile, we've got data from 2007 through 2016 in the system now. Soon to be updated with 2017 data as that's released. And I'll give you a sneak peek to what's coming. We're also looking at a richer library of example load profiles here, beyond just these ones from the EPA that are currently available. But I do want to point out the visualization here that allows us to both select and view different stretches of time. So you can draw on. You can look at all these years of data. You can zoom in and choose a particular period. You can choose a different data set for analysis. And then these colored overlays are showing the variability inherent in that. So if I zoom in, I can see the daily and hourly variation. But if I'm looking at a larger region in time, so say all of 2016, the highs show the daily highs and daily lows here, and the spread for that variability. So because I chose the Northeast region to begin with, my power versus time series here defaults to the Northeast. But maybe that's not representative of my system. You can also overlay different regions, say the shape of a typical Southwest profile, California, Northeast, Rocky Mountains, and so on, to see what represents your system most clearly. And in this case, I'm going to stick with that Northeast selection for simplicity. But we really got a lot of pressure from some of our steering committee members to say, the more you can tune this to reflect, say a utility in northern Maine that might be part of the northeastern, the NEISO, but has a different fossil fuel mixture, a different load profile shape. They want to be able to reflect that here too. All right. Oops, that was an unexpected zoom. I'm going to reload the page here. There we go. We've selected an analysis region in the Northeast. We've selected in the load profile. Now, because we're using this battery for annual peak shaving, we want to know what is not just the shape of the load profile, but what's the scale? What are we starting with? Are we starting with an individual feeder? Are you looking at something deep in the distribution system where you might want to have, a very small load profile with the same shape? Are we looking at something the size of ERCOT, or are we looking at something the size of MISO. You have a few ways to interact with it here by scaling, scaling on the time series plot, by directly typing in the size of your system, or by exploring some examples of, what's typical? What are all the NERC regions? What might you see if you were doing a project scaled to the whole Northeast Power Coordinating Council, say, or all of, or drilling into, say, an individual balancing area. So this is, again, what we're doing is looking at the scale of the system before that you're looking at to get the context right. So here I chose a pretty small region, looking at, let's say just the Western Massachusetts Electric Company. So total peak load of 775 megawatts. Okay, because we input a fossil fuel only load profile, this step defaults to being skipped, but I'll go back and show you how it works later. It's kind of a cool way to choose the applicable fossil fuel mixture that play in your system. So, most commonly, if you're bringing your own load profile, you're looking at the total load served, not just that served by fossil fuel. And so in order to calculate things like emissions, or to estimate that, we need to have a sense of how much of that load is being served by each individual fuel type. And again, we're showing a variety of different fossil fuel mixtures representative of the different regions of the country. And so what you're seeing here are data from the EIA that's broken out monthly to say, so in the Northeast in January and February of 2016, the baseload nuclear, and this is the assumed dispatch order, so nuclear first, then wind, then biomass, then solar, coal, geothermal, hydroelectric, natural gas, and petroleum. So only during these peaks in February, October, and May do you see petroleum being used at all. Hydroelectric, mostly base load, but cycled a little bit to meet this load. So what we're doing here is really trying to be clear about what are we assuming is happening with the operation in your system, so that the estimates at the end don't come out of left field. And again, it's a chance to tune these parameters to better reflect what's going on in your particular system. Maybe the fossil fuel mixture in your particular system of interest is typical of the Northeast, like this one, or maybe it's more coal heavy, like in the Rocky Mountains, or as in the case of that Maine example, maybe it's more hydro rich, like the Northwest. So that gives you a chance to tune a little bit. Again, I'm going to go back and skip this step now because the load I chose was fossil fuel only. So it's already captured here. Oh, you know what? I'm not going to do that because there's another interesting step here. Because these are broken out monthly, we're looking at pretty flat breakdowns of different fuel types. But as you're all aware, the solar profile does not look like that. It's not flat over the course of the year. So if you happen to know what your variable generation is doing, if you know your wind and solar, you can upload those directly. Or we can estimate it for you based on the region of interest. So you can search for different locations in the United States or dig around on the map to a weather station. And then based on which weather station is selected, a representative wind and solar profile, so that you can get the hour-to-hour typical variability, is selected during the same from a typical meteorological year, but it is then coupled with the fossil fuel mixture in the previous stage. So again, if you know your wind data but not your solar, you can have us estimate one and bring the other, or have us do both, and so on. Nate and Samantha, are we cruising along okay, or are there a lot of questions popping up that I should clarify here?
No, there's a bunch of questions that are coming in, and thanks for all those folks sending in your questions, but I don't think we have any that are clarifying questions. I think we can save them till the end.
Okay, great, thanks. All right, so here's where we're going from the before to the after. So I'm clicking along through the different steps. I see that I have a caution here because I was fossil fuel correcting an all fossil fuel load. You can go back and revisit previous steps. Oh, that's interesting. The map has collapsed when I zoomed. But okay, so going from before to after, we knew what our system load was in the first place, the 775 megawatts. And now we're looking at what are we deploying our battery system to do? In this case, what if we needed a fleet of batteries in the system to shave off these peakiest days of the summer to drop it down to 600 megawatt load. And again, this visualization is showing what the deployed energy storage would be doing for us. In this case, taking off however much load we propose. Now, again, with energy storage, it's not a magic box. It's going to have some efficiency associated with it. If you know what that is or want to look at an envelope, say what would it be if it were perfect? What's a typical advanced lead acid battery? What's a typical sodium sulfur? And we provide documentation about where we got those values here. But they're meant as a guidepost, right? To say if you want to do a rough cut, use some of our numbers. If you happen to know better, enter your own. So let's go with lithium ion here. And then the next question is, where in the system are you putting this? And it matters a lot in terms of the way we calculate losses and conceptualize this. Is our battery storage system going, Tesla Powerwall in the home? Is this co-located with generation? Maybe co-located with a big wind farm or coal plant, or as most typically is done, is this happening in the substation? And that was the default given, and what I'll go with here. This step is a review. So are there any errors? In this case, it's saying I didn't select an analysis region in all my clicking around. So I went back to that step and did so. Back to my summary page. Now it says that in at least one of the hours, there's a change that's greater than or equal to 15%. And this is hitting the boundary of one of our assumptions. So again, it's not saying we're not going to estimate it for you. It's saying please be cognizant of what assumptions we're making, and we're reviewing all of the choices we made previously before clicking estimate. So on a lot of proprietary analysis software that does this in more detail, that kind of an estimate might take a very long time to run. But in the screening tool, it's pretty quick. And we can dive in and keep the warnings around and start looking at some of the system level impacts. So for energy storage, for peak shaving, first of all, we're doing a little calculation here to say, well, what kind of a fleet of batteries did we actually deploy here in order to have that kind of peak shaving on the scale that we input? We're talking about a fleet of 181 megawatt power and 2,400 kilowatts, 2,400 megawatt hours of energy capacity. And then the final state of charge of that system as deployed here will be fully charged. So some of the impacts that you might care about are those peak power shavings. And boy, this is showing that it did what we said it would do, and it shaved our peak by 22.4%. And the associated fossil fuel used by the same proportion. But the energy savings were not significant, though not terribly inefficient. Right? Because of when this was deployed, we didn't get too big of an efficiency hit. But what else is going on in the system? Ramping. Well, we didn't change the system's need to ramp up like in the morning pickup, but we did, by the way this battery was deployed, cause it to ramp down more steeply, and that might not be something that you're worried about, or it might be. What are the emissions consequences? And this we find is pretty counterintuitive. The same, we've published a couple papers where the same solar power deployment coupled with the same energy storage in different parts of the country can either increase or decrease your carbon footprint, depending upon how much of the load is moved from, say, fossil fuel to hydro or natural gas to coal because of the hours it's deployed. In this case, we see a slight benefit in reduced acid rain. If you're in a market where sulfur dioxide is being tracked, a slight reduction in the NOx, which is important in some urban non-attainment zones and particulate, but really no significant change in the carbon footprint. Other impacts, costs. As deployed, this battery did not change the natural gas fuel cost or petroleum fuel cost significantly. We're using about the same there. And then I do want to dig into another kind of exploratory tool here. Digging into your results, they can be exported directly. You can spit them out as CSV files or Excel spreadsheets to put into your own analysis tools, or you can keep exploring them in this sandbox by looking at, again, the same kind of time series visualization that we think is a pretty slick way of digging around in noisy time series, or zooming right to periods of interest. Where was the day where we saw the maximum difference in power? Well, this takes us right to this day in August of 2016, where we shaved off the biggest peak. Or what's the change to our load duration curve? For this peak shaving, it's pretty straightforward. We saw that those resources that are only used for a very small number of hours during the peakiest days are no longer required. And yeah, so there are ways to dig into the results here or export them for your own curiosity. All right, it looks like we have a bit more time, so I'm going to jump to another example that looks at a different tool. I think another thing that people have chosen to do a lot with this tool that I'm not going to do here, but is often explored is so I have this system that I've proposed for peak shaving to meet one need. What would happen if I operated it differently? What would happen if I took a system of the same size, went back to the beginning of my energy storage calculation, and chose a different objective? So commonly we might save what we did here as energy storage for peak shaving, and put the size of the system and then went through again and compared the results to if we were doing this to follow a market price signal, for example, or deploying it daily to peak shave and valley fill. So I'm going to navigate away to look at photovoltaics. Another thing that we've tried to do here, and I think given the project that Nate was talking about, I'm going to leave behind my existing project. We're trying to not have a black box and a secret sauce about calculating things, but bring in a lot of peer-reviewed and existing well-regarded tools into this interface to put more data at your fingertips. So in this case, so for photovoltaic generation, we give you the chance to upload what you have, or go right to NREL's system advisory model to develop the solar distribution representative of what you're doing with their resource analysis work. So if we're looking in, say, Southern California here, or if I zoom right into Los Angeles, It's a laggy, so I'm just going to click and take us to Santa Monica instead. And again, this is looking at DC PV capacity. Are we looking at something on the scale of a whole region, a state? What if we're looking California-wide, for example? And then here's a chance to fine-tune what the solar installation looks like using, again, that NREL system advisory model. What kind of panels, efficiency, DC to AC ratio, and so on. And similarly, what does the system load profile look like before we begin? And here we'll use a California shape, and let's take 4 years of data instead of 1 this time. Oops, so there I'm looking at 4, but I want to actually select 4. And it doesn't need to be right on an even year break either. A few ways to interact with it, dragging things around or explicitly typing it in. Again, here's a chance to compare the shapes of different load profiles, either what you upload or representative of different parts of the country. And again, what size of system are we looking at? Is this an individual feeder? This is just as valid if you're down in the distribution system as if you're looking at huge swaths of the country. So I'm going to drill into CalISO. And because of the load shape I pulled over being all fossil to begin with, don't need to do this correction, but you'd have that option when you input your own profile. And finally, where's this going? Well, we're looking at rooftop solar. Let's put it at end use here. And reviewing our choices, let's estimate it. It'll take a little bit longer because it's more years of data being chewed through, but still should only take a couple of seconds. All right, so again, in this case, now we're reporting out the total PV system production, looking at energy and power reductions. If there's a value associated with this, there's just a quick little calculator over here to see what that number works out to be. Nothing too elaborate, but just another number at your fingertips. Well, and no shock here. Adding a ton of solar exacerbates the duck curve a little bit, or a lot, the way I chose the numbers. But here's a quick way of figuring out how much and zooming in where that happens. Big emissions benefits to offset that ramping offset. Again, no surprises here, but a quick ability to look at the numbers and reduced fuel costs from offset pieces. All right. Before we go back to question and answer, I'm going to navigate out of the tool briefly to show you some more of what's coming down the pike. So we're in the middle of a major reworking of the guts of this system, getting it deployed in Python. But I think the real cool part is in the visual interface changes. So I'm going to switch over to my slides again to show that what's coming next is an ability to look at not just one project at a time, but multiple technologies stacked up together. And so where we had that, pick one technology down the left side of the screen, now we're giving the user a chance to pick, well, which impacts do I really want to dig into? And that can be, all of the above, or maybe you're really just targeting emissions, or we're really just targeting those ramping requirements. And it can cut out some of the intermediate analysis steps to be a little bit more targeted there. And then the real kicker, I think, is the ability to stack up different technologies, maybe 3 different energy storage types and a demand response program, all happening together. Then similarly, we'll review the input and see the results. So the things that are changing, again, are enabling different technology combos, different choices of results, a slicker mobile design. Those of you following along on your phones as we go might notice that it's functional, but not as elegant as it will be, and speedier performance. So the results then of stacked technologies. So again, we're assuming we've gone through all the steps of choosing the parameters for using energy storage for, in this case, following market prices. We're looking at the total impacts of all these technologies stuck together. In this mock-up, we're looking at the pre-project. You want to see the values before, and then after 2 different kinds of energy storage have been stacked on. So the results then will be before, after the first is applied, and after the second, and the total savings. And switching back and forth across impacts. All right. So if we have time at the end, I'm happy to go through more examples, but I don't want to step on all of your questions. My appeal to you is please, 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 if this is interesting to the work that you're doing, give it a whirl and let us know how it's working for you. And in this year's push on the project, we're really looking and for partners to dig into specific cases and show where new insight is gained. So we'd love to publish with you. We'd love to come in and work with your teams to tailor the solutions. If you want our help in running the analysis, we're happy to do it, or to just find out about what was valuable for you. We'd like to be able to use that to see where we're having the most impact and to improve the tool as necessary. Also, development, as I said, is ongoing, and we are absolutely steered by our Department of Energy sponsor and our steering committee that's made up of public utility commissioners, utilities, consumer advocacy groups, and other government agencies, and a couple of equipment vendors. So if you'd like to steer the direction of what we're doing next, please let me know. We'll be at Distributech next week in New Orleans, if any of you are there, or would like to work with you on terms that are convenient. So I do hope that this is of value. The goal is to put a free, open source, easily accessible web calculator in your hands and make the opportunities and knock-on effects of grid technologies clearer and more apparent. So with that, maybe I'll kick it back over to Sam and Nate for questions, and then we can go from there.
Great. Thanks so much, Karen. Thanks for the intro to the tool. It looks like a potent tool. I want to play around with it more myself. We did get a bunch of questions that I think you covered at the end about stacking technologies and projects that might involve, PV, smart charging, storage, and the like. And so maybe at the end too, you could sort of walk us through a stacked project like that as well. A question about what is the minimum solar or distributed energy resource in megawatts or megawatt hours that GridPIQ is able to visualize?
There is no minimum, but what we do is we scale the impacts down. So if you're deploying something that's the size of California or the size of 1 watt, we can go down to arbitrarily small chunks. The place that breaks down is that you would see a small system being smoother than it is in reality. You'd lose some of the harmonics and the corners and the chunkiness of a house level deployment. But for this, but we would stand behind the estimates as being in the right ballpark, down to arbitrarily small systems.
So if you were a commercial entity, you could actually use this tool as an end user to look at peaks. It might not be, it might in the data might not be that sharp, but you could actually do that.
Absolutely, yeah. Just don't be fooled by the national map at the beginning. We're not looking at things on a national scale. That's about getting you in the right context in the right place. But we're looking just as vigilantly at impacts in the distribution system and at end use as we are, state and regional level programs. So, absolutely, go down into the weeds.
Great. A question whether scenarios from users are being saved by GridPIQ in an archive. Are they being are inquiries being tracked?
We are not tracking inquiries except where the user explicitly saves them, and in that case, we're only associating it with a username and password. I think going forward, we would link it to an email just because it's easier to recover. We are not data mining this on the back end. And I would say that unless our steering committee tells us that we need to be doing that, our impulse is to put this tool in your hands rather than doing the Facebook data mining thing. And I would say that if we ever went in that direction, we would be super transparent about it and shout it from the rooftops. Did that answer the question? Was that the information that the questioner wanted to track?
I think that covers it. That's helpful. Here's a question. This says, I'm a consultant and want to use the tool outside the United States. Can I place customized data load profiles into it to do this kind of thing?
Absolutely. To the extent that you have your own load profiles, the before and after, this should be applicable. Where it breaks down currently is that we're looking at historical fossil fuel operations to say, all right, here's how we're mining the EPA's data to say, here's how fossil fuel plants in the region behaved historically under similar loading conditions to extrapolate how they would behave in the future. So I think it would be a good first cut on estimates there, but it wouldn't give the same fidelity as locations in the United States. However, I will say that one area that we're exploring on the research side is setting up a dispatch that's decoupled from the historical operation, and this is both for serving our interested users outside of the country, but also for those domestically that want to try more outrageous future grid scenarios, right? Some of the really interesting changes we're seeing depart from past operations with retirements of a lot of fossil fuel units, with really high penetrations of wind and solar. And so one of the things that we're developing on the side that's not available in the tool now is the ability to pick and choose exactly what units are responding to changes in the load so that we're not reliant on historical operation. Does that make sense? Kind of a quick and dirty production cost model mode where we're looking at how the units available would be dispatched differently in the changing grid conditions. So on that, I would hope to serve the international needs better and those in the United States as well. But currently, we really are tethered to historical operation. And so I would say this would be a good first cut for that estimate.
Very cool. Well, on the a follow-up question about sort of the more wild scenarios. Is it possible to model a hypothetical scenario of 100% renewable energy and storage for particular areas?
Is it possible to estimate 100% renewable? Yeah, I think it would be. And you do it a little bit through the back door, right? You'd be kind of bypassing a lot of the data that we're drawing on right now with historical fossil fuel operation by inputting your load profile before and after and your solar and wind as big enough to serve the whole load. And the dispatch order would favor them. And that's a great question, and one that we we would like to explore with with the folks doing that. I think it's possible. With that said, we don't have current use cases doing that, so there might be some kinks to work out.
Great, thanks. Question whether energy efficiency programs can be modeled.
Absolutely. So that's one case where we don't have it on the marquee just yet, right? We started with CVR, energy storage, photovoltaics, and virtual battery demand response programs. On our short list of items to add there are distributed wind and energy efficiency, especially drawing on the EPA's historical data sets that were and the AVERT modeling tool that was built for energy storage. That would work well and quickly. I would say the starting point now for energy efficiency calculations would be use custom to go through with the before and after load profiles, and that would absolutely be in the wheelhouse of this tool to give answers there. What we'd like to do next is to do more of what we've done with the virtual battery model, where we've modeled individual air conditioners and refrigerators and so on, but with energy efficiency parameters instead of demand response.
Okay, this is a question. Someone asks, who is this targeted for? It looks like it's focused on hypothetical situations, perhaps on more academic. Do you envision that it can provide bankable simulation results for project developers?
So bankable is not a word that we use a lot in the academic research community, but I think the target audience is a lot more applied than our fellow researchers, and that is we want folks to be able to look at their project quickly and clearly, and to get a sense of what the impact would be, and certainly sharing those results. Depending upon the level of rigor that the user needed, could be enough to say, here's a model that the Department of Energy Office of Electricity has gotten behind for an estimate here. Then, depending upon how much detail they needed, they might turn to a more detailed analysis tool to look at their precise system, or it might be enough already. So they might turn to distribution system modeling tool like GridLabD or OpenDSS, if that were needed. I feel like I didn't answer that question terribly deeply. Are bankable answers available? We think so. The utilities and vendors on our committee have told us that as it stands, it's useful, but we're always eager to hear from users what do you need to get across the finish line on your particular project, if it's the right amount of detail or not. So please contact me offline if that wasn't an adequate answer.
Okay, thanks. So I asked you about efficiency. What approach would you recommend for modeling an offshore wind project using the tool?
Let's see, would the offshore wind project have an associated load that it was serving? In which case I would say the diving into the custom module of giving a before and after. Oh, you know what? With offshore wind, I would say if you modeled before as being zero megawatts all the time, and after the installation being the resource assessment for that deployment, that would show you the change in the system with wind. But I would still choose an associated load profile. So what region is that offshore wind being built? Because it's only once you have a load connected with it that you can see some of the knock-on effects of changes in ramping requirements and so on. So I would say use the custom module with before and after on the offshore wind, either kind of with no load to begin with, or with an estimate of what region's load you were addressing.
Great, thanks. Someone asked, does the tool address power quality issues like power factor, harmonics, etc.?
It does not. So because we're looking at an hourly resolution, we've jumped over these stability issues, voltage control, power factor. There are a lot of, so that was one of the trade-offs we chose in choosing this to be a screening tool that looks at the real power associated with these projects. And then, in our shop, we turned to other tools for those reactive power analyses that model the full three-phase power flow. This is serving a need that's not the three-phase power flow, but should give you a first look with the hourly resolution that then indicates where to dig in subsequently.
Okay, someone asks, is there a place to see the uncertainty associated with the estimates and the level of
good question.
granularity?
So as we're currently reporting these results, we're doing so deterministically. We're saying, here are the changes we estimate. We have a uncertainty, and the reason for that mostly is all the input data doesn't have uncertainty associated with it. So while we have the mechanisms to propagate uncertainty through this, we haven't gone through and taken all of our data sources from the EPA, from the user, from the EIA, from the weather data we're drawing on, and given them associated uncertainties. But it's in our research hopper because we think without giving you a confidence interval, we're only giving you half the answer. So it's something that we'd like to work more on, and so far it hasn't been a high priority for many of our users. If we get input that would be something to concentrate on, then we'll boost it up the priority list. So I'll make a note that at least one of our listeners would do so, and please, folks, reach out to me if that would move this tool into the more useful category for you.
Okay, thanks. Here's a specific question that we may have to go back to. This is one of the scenarios you talked about. What's the difference between the uncoordinated charging profile in step 6 and the coordinated charging allowed times in step 9?
Oh, okay, in the smart charging module.
I think that's right.
Would you like me to switch over to the browser? Let's see.
Sure,
okay,
if you
looks
can.
Looks like I have control. So in the smart charging profile, and I just went over to this module here. So what we're doing here, okay, so the first steps are the same kind of thing that we went through before. What's the underlying load profile? And the uncoordinated charging profile is, what do users natively do, without any kind of control signal being sent to their charging device? What do people in your system, when do they charge their electric vehicles? So what we've done here is pulled in some profiles from the electric vehicle project to see empirically in studies that took place in Los Angeles, Houston, Dallas, Atlanta, Tennessee, Philadelphia, Oregon. There's some slight variations about when people charge during the day on weekdays and weekends. So as a starting point, or uploading your own system-specific profile, when do people charge their electric vehicles and place load on the system without any meddling or coordination? Then the subsequent steps. Okay, so then we're looking at, all right, how many vehicles are actually in the system, and we have some census data from how many automobiles are present in these different places, and electric vehicles particularly. We're looking at charging power and give some typical examples of a level 3 charger, or things that are typical of different electric vehicles. And then finally, the coordinated charging is if you're then sending a control signal to say, when can vehicles charge, as a way of focusing the impact on the grid, or taking some of the peakiness out of it. You can dictate what windows are governed by the coordinator. So I hope that answers the question, that you're looking at not electrification as written now. We're not, this existing module doesn't say going from gas vehicles to electric vehicles. It's going from electric vehicles charging whenever they feel like it to electric vehicles that have a coordinated signal to make sure that they are fully charged by the time that they need to be to meet the user's needs, but then can be regulated within that window to minimize impact to the grid.
Great, thanks for walking through that. We are at the top of the hour, and so I think we're going to have to call it quits for questions there. There's a lot of great questions, and thanks to everybody for the great questions, and huge thanks to you, Karen. In addition to the questions, you've got a lot of kudos about the tool and a lot of interest in it. So, but before signing off, I just want to give you an opportunity to talk about how we can help with the development of sort of the next phase, and any couple words to wrap things up. Any last thoughts?
Thank you all for your interest, and Nate for the opportunity to speak. Please do let me know if you have questions, and I'll try to answer the ones that were already posed that we didn't get to offline. And what we would love most of all right now is you telling us what you want to use this for, and at the level of detail that you're comfortable with, so that we can showcase where it works and make it better where there's room for improvement. Thank you all.
Great. Well, thanks again, Karen. Before closing out, I just want to let you know that we do have an upcoming webinar on February 28th from 1 to 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time. We'll host a webinar on the state of the U.S. energy storage industry. It'll be a 2018 year in review. It'll feature Dan Finn Foley of Wood Mackenzie Power and Renewables, who will share insights related to recent developments in the energy storage market, including deployment trends, policy updates, market outlook. So we hope you'll join us for that, and I'll turn it over to Sam to close us out.
Thanks, Nate, and thanks, Karen, for your presentation. So as Nate said, we hope to see you at our next webinar. Until then, check your email. You'll get an email from us soon with a link to a recording of today's webinar. And to stay updated on all of our upcoming webinars and all of our news, we encourage you to visit our website, CESA.org. We're also on Facebook and Twitter. So again, we hope to see you at the next one. Thanks for coming to our webinar today. Bye, everyone.